All righty. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our September 3rd Thursday. When Sarah and I first logged in, we just were a little shocked that, it's already the third Thursday of September. Wow, how far we've
Unfair.
come. Um, I have a few announcements before I pass things off to Sarah and we get this show rolling. So first off, if you haven't seen it, we are well underway with our fall 2025 classes and events catalog. Um, Sarah, if you got the drop in the link in the chat box, we have just a wealth, an embarrassment of craft and business topics and community events throughout the rest of the year that keep your writer soul satisfied. So if you haven't looked through our offerings, please take a moment and see what we got going for you. Um, Continuing, touching on that point, we actually have a couple classes that might be up your alley, so to speak. This weekend, we have Rachel Tolson teaching Lighten the Mood, why and how to add humor to your stories. The deadline to sign up for that live class is tomorrow at 5 p.m. So get your registration in if you want to be there for the actual Zoom. And of course, our own panelist here with us, Sherry Thomas, is teaching Anatomy for Romance. That is going to be happening at early October, October 1st. And it's going to be a wonderful class, as Sherry is a wonderful speaker. As you will, if you're not familiar with her yet, uh, once you get through tonight, you'll be excited to sign up for this
Pressure to
class.
perform. Pressure to perform now.
Hey, I got to talk you up. We also have our next agent symposium. We're coming up towards the final stretch of our agent symposium presentations on next Saturday. Yes, right, next Saturday. From acquisition to publication with Stephanie Delman. This is going to be covering that awkward, fearful stretch that you may reach after you've signed your agent, sold your book. Now, what happens next? What are all the many steps that it takes to get from selling your book to a publisher and getting it actually out and into bookstores? What do you need to do? What are your agents doing? What are your editors doing? Come find out. We'll discuss it all. It'll be really great, and there'll also be Q&A sections. Come with questions. Next, join us in real life. We have a few events coming up. Sherry, I believe, will also be at Library Con. You and I will be talking. So next weekend, September 27th, again from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. is Library Con. I'll be running two panels. Sherry will be on one of them. So come join us. We have details on our website with when those panels are, but it's just a fun event. It's a free kind of nerdy comic convention where there's also plenty of writers, video game voice actors, cosplay. It's just a really fun event happening in Pflugerville. So come check it out. The following weekend in Bernie is the Bernie Book Festival. I'll be there. I'll be running a panel, and we'll have member signers throughout the day. So please come and say hello because I love the chance to get to meet our members around the state. And Bernie is a wonderful little city with a beautiful book festival. Come join us. Next month, we have our October 3rd Thursdays, Thrills, Chills, and Twists, Writing a Page Turner. We have Maya Golden Bethany, Kelsey Cox, and John McDermott, board member John McDermott, who recently his book is just about to come out, and it's going to be a doozy. This will be an in-person book people event. So please come if you're in the area, drive in if it's within a reasonable driving in distance and come see this because this is going to be a really, really fantastic panel. We cannot promise a live stream. We will see what we can do to immortalize this panel, but we encourage you to be in the room. So information, I believe, is being dropped in the chat box. There it is. Finally, I want to just let you guys know, as this is a free event, Writers League of Texas puts on so many events, and we do so much to try and support writers across this state to make sure you guys have all the information you need to get your book where you want it to go. And we, for this program especially, but across many of our programs, we can't do it without your support. Whether you sign up as a member, it's only $50 for the year at the basic price, and there's with plenty of discounts if you're above 55, if you're a student, or if you've served in the military. please consider signing up for a member or donating $5 for you can consider it like the price of admission if you are willing to open your wallets to us so we can continue to put on programs like this in the future. We really appreciate it. We can't do this without you, and we do it for you. So please consider leaving us a small donation or signing up as a member. But speaking of not being able to do this for other people, we do this for our writers as well. Our panelists have such amazing books that, again, like I said about Sherry's class, you'll want to buy these books by the time this panel is over. And we have partnered with book people here in Austin to sell those books. This is, you can support your writers here. You can support a local independent bookstore by using that link that we dropped in the chat box to find these books. There's a handy little shelf with all of them right there for you. You can simply just hit add to cart right down the list and check them out, get those books in your hands very soon without having to resort to the dreaded A word. So I hope to convince you guys to pick up a few copies, maybe buy one for a friend. Anyways, hello. This is all I have to say. I really appreciate you letting me take up this time at the beginning for all these announcements. I'm going to pass it off to the wonderful Sarah Renee Beach to get us started.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to all of you also joining us on our YouTube live stream. My name is Sarah Renee Beach. I am the program director here at the Writers League of Texas, which means I get to plan our classes and events alongside Laura Arnold, who is our program manager. And tonight's panel, all about writing ensemble casts, was actually very lovingly put together by Laura, and they were very excited to moderate tonight, but unfortunately they're under the weather. We hope you get better, Laura. So they asked me to step in, which, you didn't really have to twist my arm to step in. This is an incredible group of authors we have with us tonight. And I'm always blown away by the work that Laura does. Laura's really great at their job. But when I was preparing for tonight, I was especially pleased with this group that Laura's assembled. These books are really fun. These authors are really fun. And all of that to say, I think we're all in for a treat. And so without further ado, I'll introduce our panelists. Annalee Newitz is a science journalist who also writes science fiction. They are the author of several best-selling books, including The Terraformers, which was nominated for the Nebula Award, and Four Lost Cities, A Secret History of the Urban Age. They have a monthly column in New Scientist magazine and are the co-host of the Hugo-winning podcast, Our Opinions Are Correct. Their novella, Automatic Noodle, which you all will hear about tonight, dropped on August 5th, 2025. Annalee, thank you so much for being here. And our second panelist is Parini Shroff. Parini received her BA in creative writing from the University of Southern California and her JD from Loyola Law School. She also studied at the University of Texas at Austin, here in Texas, where she received her MFA in creative writing from the New Writers Project. Her debut novel, which we'll hear more about tonight, The Bandit Queens, is a national bestseller that was longlisted for the Women's Prize in Fiction, as well as an Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. Her second novel is forthcoming in July 2026. Parini, thank you so much for being here. And our last panelist is Sherry Thomas. Sherry Thomas, USA Today bestselling author, WLT fan favorite, decided years ago that her goal in life is to write every kind of book she enjoys reading. Thus far, she has published romance, fantasy, mystery, young adult, and 3 books inspired by the martial arts epics she grew up devouring. Her books regularly receive starred reviews and Best of the Year honors from trade publications, including the New York Times and National Public Radio. A Study in Scarlet Women, A Conspiracy in Belgravia, and The Hollow of Fear, the first 3 entries in her gender-bending Lady Sherlock historical mystery series, are all NPR Best Books of the Year. Her latest release is The Librarians, a contemporary mystery set in her neighborhood branch library in Austin, Texas, and it's available for pre-order. It comes out September 30th. Thank you so much for being here, Sherry.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And before we jump in, I want to let our audience know that we'll be collecting your questions and we'll dedicate some time towards the end of the program to answering them. So please do submit questions along the way. We have a Q&A section of the Zoom. We welcome chatter in the chat box, but if you have a question for a panelist, please put it in that Q&A box. You can find it on your Zoom toolbar. That'll just keep us organized so we have all the questions in front of us when we're ready for them. But yeah, so let's jump in. I think the best way for us to begin our discussion is if each of you could briefly introduce us to the cast of characters in your books. Without giving too much away, tell us who populates the world of your book and what roles do they play in the story. Parini, I'd love to start with you if that's okay.
Absolutely. Again, thank you for having me here, and thank you everybody for joining. The Bandit Queen starts with Geetha, a young woman in modern day rural India. Uh, Everyone in her village avoids her because they think she killed her husband. She didn't, but it's a rumor that she finds is to her advantage because people leave her alone. Her life gets a bit complicated when the other women of the village decide that they also would like to become widows because they want to get rid of their good-for-nothing spouses. So then Geetha kind of becomes an unwitting fake consultant, trying to keep her secret and trying to help these women. And the ensemble aspect of it comes in when we start to hear more, these women start becoming more vocal as they approach and kind of demand Geetha's help. And so the cast of characters, aside from Geetha, our protagonist, is Saloni, who is Geetha's former childhood best friend, now turned nemesis. There's Farah, who is kind of new to the village, but is the first to approach Geetha and is kind of manipulative, not above blackmail to get what she wants. And there's also a set of twins, one of whom hates her husband because she survived his acid attack and then was forced to marry him, and her sister, who's very supportive and loyal. Uh, and then there's also a character named Khushi, who is a Dalit woman, which is the lowest caste in the caste system within India. And she also joins their band to kind of take down the patriarchy.
Wow, it's such a rich group, so well developed.
Yeah,
Thank you for introducing
thank
us
you.
to them. And Annalee, how about you? What about your cast?
Yeah, Parini, I want to like hang out with that cast. That was such a great intro. I was like already cheering. And I think that's something that makes for a good ensemble is when you're kind of cheering for them to get together, right? So I don't have a main character in Automatic Noodle. It's actually an ensemble from the beginning. It's set 5 years after California wins a war of independence against the United States. And it's set in San Francisco, and the city is rebuilding. It's just been bombed to shit. And this group of 4 robots have been abandoned in a ghost kitchen. And they kind of come back online through a series of accidents, and they have to figure out what to do. And so they all have roles to play in the restaurant that sort of switch around during the course of the book. The first one we meet is named Stay Behind, and he's a former soldier who fought in the war and is a humanoid shape, kind of a Terminator, but he likes to dress really snappy. So he kind of wears like cute jeans and like a leather apron. So you have to kind of imagine like a gay Terminator kind of vibe. And he's working alongside in the front, he's working alongside a robot named Sweetie. And she is sort of a humanoid from the waist up. And then from the waist down, she has 3 metal legs that terminate in wheels. So she's sort of half bot, half human looking. And that's because she was designed originally to work in a bank kiosk where she was nailed physically down into the kiosk and could not ever leave. So she had to perform customer service all the time. And which she was not very fond of. And indeed spends a large part of the book ripping off all of this human stuff on her body that she's really sick of. And then there's 2 other robot characters who are best friends and who have been working together before the action starts. One is named Cayenne. Kyan is a soft robot made of squishy materials who is shaped like an octopus and has LEDs under their skin so that they can show their emotion through the colors that they're emitting. And they've also hacked their legs so that they have taste sensors on their legs, and they have an exquisite ability to taste spices and to figure out, they have an algorithm for figuring out what is yummy. And finally, there's the robot Hands, who's basically like a KitchenAid mixer with two big arms. And Hands is a chef who makes dough. They're very invested in dough making, and they have a really exquisite sense of texture. So they're really good at all the things I'm bad at with cooking, actually, which is knowing when dough is proved and better and is stretching the right way. So they're very, very good at that aspect of it. And they're joined somewhat later in the story by a human named Robles, who has worked with them before and is actually an undocumented Californian who's sort of fleeing from America for obvious reasons. And yeah, they have to come together and figure out how to run the restaurant and who really wants to do which job. So they kind of all shift around what jobs they want to do, because it turns out that the humans kind of assigned them to all the wrong jobs.
Wow, wow, wow. Incredible. I cannot wait to hear more about how you developed all of these characters, but fascinating. And Sherry, how about you introduce us to your ensemble cast?
I'm so glad I have a copy of my book right next to me, because after all these fascinating ensembles, I was like, who are my people again? So because my story is set in a library, which is, in fact, it's set in the library like 3 miles from my house. It's so the cast is just 3 fully qualified librarians, the kind with MLIS degrees, and 1 new library clerk who joins the library. And so of the 3 fully qualified librarians, we have Sophie, who is a sort of totally put together woman, who is in fact hiding a great big secret. And then we have Jonathan, who's a 6'4" former football player who is still yearning for his high school not quite boyfriend. And we have Astrid, who's slightly younger, maybe not quite 30. The other 2, I think Sophie's in her early 40s and Jonathan in his late 30s. And Astrid is about 29 and is your typical, well, she thinks of herself as, she thinks of librarians as exhibit A for the clientele that the original Trader Joe's set out to serve, the overeducated and underpaid. And Hazel, who might be the first among equals of these characters, is our kind of point of view entry character, because she's new at the library too. And although we are all familiar with, even people who are familiar with libraries may not necessarily know exactly how libraries are run behind the scenes. So she's kind of our entry point character. She's had a little training, so she just starts her job and she just, does the filing and sorting and checking out and things like that. And everybody has their secret and nobody is intending on becoming friends. But then the library holds a board game night, their inaugural murder mystery board game night. And pretty soon afterwards, 2 patrons who were in the library that day were found dead. And then so a whole big investigation starts. And suddenly everybody at the library is like, oh my God, what was I doing that night? And gosh, I was doing something I shouldn't have been doing. So yeah, and it goes from there because it's a mystery.
Oh my gosh. I'm already so impressed by everything that fiction writers, novel writers always impress me, but all of that you're holding in your head and all that you've fully developed and teased out to create this incredible cast of characters, I'm already so blown away. But Sherry, did you set out to write an ensemble? Was that the plan from the beginning, or did kind of the number of people involved expand as you developed your story?
I actually set out to write an ensemble from the very beginning because this was what my publisher asked for. when my previous contract came for renewal, they say, we'll take 2 Lady Sherlock books, and we would like you to write us a contemporary mystery featuring librarians. Basically, they wanted the Thursday Murder Club, but with librarians. At the time, I hadn't heard of the Thursday Murder Club yet. So I went and read it, and I said, okay, this is an ensemble cast. It's like the most classic of ensemble casts. So, and, another comp they came up with was, only murders in the building, but with librarians. So that's, again, an ensemble cast. So, in fact, in my contract, it says a ensemble contemporary mystery with 3 female librarians. And I was like, my favorite librarian at my library is a man. So I threw in a man too. So now I also have 4 people.
Oh, wow, wow, wow. That's so interesting. I can't wait to hear more about how then you tackled that challenge. Or did it feel like a challenge, or you were
It
like,
was a huge challenge.
yeah, okay, we'll get into it. But Annalee, what about you? Did you set out with these characters in mind, or did they kind of expand as you wrote the story?
I definitely knew I was going to be starting with an ensemble cast, and pretty much all of my books have ensemble casts of some kind or another. And I like to, in the past, I've played around with POV in my books where you think it's not an ensemble, but then it actually is an ensemble, because I really loved the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, and I think she just does that so incredibly well, where you're like, oh, it's actually all one person. I think it's okay if spoilers for a relatively classic book at this point. So I knew it would be an ensemble cast, and it's because it's a novella, it's short, it was quite challenging to figure out how to distinguish all the characters. They're all robots. They look different. But one of the really super good pieces of feedback I got from my editor was, okay, the characters all have different motivations, and she got that, but she was like, they all sound the same. They sound like me, because when I'm writing dialogue, I'm like, well, what would I say? And so she was like, you have to make sure that as they're talking, that they have different, like, either tics or like things that they're obsessed with, ways that they talk, so that readers will be like, yeah, I get who's speaking. And so that was a big thing that I had to work on a lot in my next draft, was like making sure that they sounded different. And the novel that I'm just finishing up right now, I've been really conscious about that, because it's another ensemble cast, and I'm like, okay, they cannot all sound like me. I like need to make sure that, so one of them speaks very formally and one of them is very casual. And so, yeah, I think that's one of my biggest challenges with ensembles.
Oh yeah, that's so fascinating. I definitely want to come back to that in a little bit. And Parina, what about you? Did you set out with this full cast in mind, or did some people kind of crop up as you began writing?
Absolutely the latter. Mine started off as a short story for a fiction workshop. And so it was really, I mean, with that kind of limited real estate, there's a reason, I was with close third with my protagonist, Geeta. And, there were really only 2 characters, and one more was named Saloni, but she wasn't in scene much. And then when I returned to the pages, this is a short story written in 2013. I kind of thought it was a done deal. And then in 2020, a friend advised me to reread it. And as I read it, I returned to this world, and it was bizarre. Like, I had enough distance that I felt like I was critiquing someone else's work. And I was like, well, what about this? What about this? Like, why didn't you address this? And I was like, whoa, there might be enough here to kind of have a larger world at play. And when I realized that, and I decided to kind of tinker with it, because there wasn't a lot for me to do in 2020, funnily enough, uh, suddenly these other kind of characters cropped up, and having their backstories, naming them first of all, and then having their own backstories, there was more room to play, if that makes sense. And so it was kind of like a French braid, where I started with like a few strands, but then I could like weave in more. And it felt, because I think I did it gradually, it didn't feel so overwhelming, because it wasn't something I set out to do. It was just through, the process of revision and editing that I kind of built the world and then included more characters.
Oh, that sounds so fun. And I love that it felt like a sense of play. That does make me think of my next question, which is, what do you think are the benefits of writing an ensemble cast, and what do you think it adds to a story? And, why did it feel important for you to tease that out?
I think, oh,
Three
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that was very loaded. We'll start with, what do you see as kind of the benefits of what it adds to your story?
Me?
Yeah, Parini.
Yeah,
Oh,
tell
okay,
us.
sorry. So allow me to explain. No, I always know it's an excellent question because I'm like, how the hell do I answer that? I think the I think the benefits are sometimes when I write in close third a lot, trying to be brave and expand, but that's historic. Thus far, that's what I've written in. And it can get kind of claustrophobic. I mean, I love being inside a character's head. I love the intimacy of it, but it can get kind of claustrophobic. And when I mentioned play, it was fun because I got to like be a little puppet master and be like, and now these characters are going to go. And the Bandit Queens is very much a dark comedy, and a lot of I think the humor comes from the dialogue, comes from the banter of these women. And so getting them in these rooms, changing the combinations of them, like who's talking to who's fighting with whom. That was an exercise in voice, but it also lets some like air in the room. And I think an ensemble can really let air in the room, especially when like sometimes even space is devoted to all the characters in an ensemble. And I love those novels where it's like the name is on the chapter and you're like, oh, now I'm back with that person. But such as with mine, where we're really with a close protagonist and then the world kind of opens up, I think it can really let air in.
That's a really good way to put it. And Aaron, for both the writer, like you said, it can feel claustrophobic to be in
Yeah.
close third with one person, but also for the reader. Um, Thank you. And Annalee, what about you? What are the benefits to
I
ensemble? What draws you
yeah,
to?
yeah, I was gonna say I really agree. I'd never thought of it that way before, but I really agree with what you were saying, Parini, about how it gives you, yeah, it gives you more space. And also, like, I mean, reading a story is like a chance to enter into a fantasy landscape, not literally necessarily, but like one of the biggest fantasies that I have as a person is, gee, I really wish I could know what it felt like to be someone else. And so it's really fun to have a narrative where like that's the point of the narrative is you get to see a bunch of perspectives really intimately. So I love that. And that's definitely something that draws me. The other thing that I really like about ensemble casts is that as a writer, I'm really obsessed with community and how communities come together and how they function and how, whether it's a family or a work group or like friendships. And so I always am drawn to situations where you see, the classic, like the team comes together and then they can do something more than they could do separately. And I just think that's such an important part of well, that's my soapbox, I guess. That's a really important part of human life. And I really want to encourage people to remember that community is super, super necessary, but also fun to read.
Absolutely. We're so interconnected. It's nice to see that reflected in fiction. Sherry, what about you?
I was going to say something similar, the found family aspect, because that's basically underlies every good ensemble cast is that found family aspect. People who start out as strangers or just pals through their circumstances and their just own mutual admiration of one another suddenly come together as a much tighter knit group. And I think also ensemble is such a great place to celebrate friendship, which although we all know friendship is hugely important, it is just you know, because I started out in romance, and romance is about love stories, and then I wrote a bunch of mysteries, and mysteries about solving the case and all that. So having that ensemble really kind of puts emphasis on friendship in ways some other genres and whatnot don't necessarily do.
Absolutely. And you mentioned some of the challenges that you faced, Sherry. Do you mind telling us a little bit about what challenges this presented for you and kind of how you worked through those?
for this particular, for the librarians, I weirdly enough had like a mini meltdown over characters, because normally it's a plot that gets me. Like I've like, because from in the beginning I was writing a character-driven genre, so I always thought plotting was my slight weak point. So I used to work on my plotting, and and then I transitioned into mystery, which is a plot-heavy genre. And I was like, hey, I can plot now. And I, was thinking I still carry all my character building skills from before. But for the librarians, I think maybe because it's a contemporary novels, and I've written so much historical like historical set mysteries, historical romances. For some reason the characters just refuse to gel together for me. And at one point I actually thought to myself, maybe I should just like give back my advance and get out from underneath this and have them find an actual librarian to write this book. But it's one of those things that sometimes you just have to give yourself time to work on stuff, and a little time, a little work, let it breathe, and things percolate through your head. And I guess the old subconscious still works. So.
It's so true. Sometimes you have to look away from it, go for a walk, yeah, metaphorically or otherwise. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm glad you didn't give your advance.
Me too.
Annalee, what about you? What challenges? I'm sorry if my dog is barking. But what
Speaking
kind
of challenges, yeah.
The dogs are a challenge for sure. Came up for you in writing this ensemble. It sounds like it's something you talked about, the voice, and but it sounds like something you've worked through before. Was there anything specific that came up with this book, other than voice, or could you tell us a little bit about how you kind of refined the voices?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that voices were a big part of it because, yeah, the dialogue is so important, I think, with an ensemble, especially. So partly I solved it by really thinking about what each character, who they were and how they would express themselves differently, from each other. And also like all of them, some more than others, are kind of obsessed with certain things. Like Cayenne, the octopus robot, they're obsessed with cryptocurrency, because in California, robots have been given only limited civil rights and they can't open bank accounts. So they're forced to have crypto as their main form of value of currency. And so like they're constantly like coming up with weird crypto schemes. So anytime someone is like, well, wait, we could do something with this weird, butt coin or whatever, that it's Cayenne. So there was that. I think the other big challenge, and I bet that Sherry and Parini also had to deal with this, is that every character has to kind of have an arc. And that is freaking hard to juggle. I mean, of course, they don't all have to have like a giant big arc, but like they kind of have to do something. Like if they're a part of the ensemble, like you kind of want to think, oh, they're different from how they were. And like the friendships have changed them somehow. And like that's a lot of like, well, in my case, that's a lot of post-it notes. Like I like put post-it notes all over this bookshelf and like kind of rearrange them and stuff. And like I was, yeah, having to do a lot of like figuring out that stuff, like nuts and bolts, like kind of like plotting, but with character in a weird way. Like it's kind of like when you're, yeah. So that was a big tangle that hopefully I untangled.
Yeah. Oh, Sherry, you're on mute.
And I was going to say that for you, it must be particularly difficult because in the space of a novella, you have developed so many arcs.
It was maybe not my greatest idea to do that, but it's a long novella, so it's yeah, I took as much space as I could.
Oh my gosh, yeah, the constraint on top of having to tease out all those arcs. Parini, what about you? What were the challenges you faced and how did you work through them?
I think the hardest thing for the Bandit Queens was really the ending, which is when I have all of them together in a room being held hostage. I mean, sorry, being held hostage in the room, like literally, metaphorically, who knows? But they're in the room, right? And at that point, I'd been like, okay, these two are gonna have a conversation, these three are gonna have a conversation. But to have all of them, it's just like I've made like a giant mess, and I'm like, oh, now I have to clean this up in a way that's satisfying because like, you know, a book is not an insubstantial amount of time to devote, and it's like a contract. It's like I'm gonna take you on this journey and I'm gonna make it satisfying. And so to kind of shit the bed like in the 11th hour is like, oh, well, you really messed up. And so I'm like, okay, how do I make this satisfying? Because it's easy, like to throw the twists and the turns, and like the character surprising you, activity surprising you. That was kind of easy because it's easy to like make that mess, but cleaning it up was difficult. So the last two chapters were difficult, not just with, well, what's going to happen, how is the resolution, but also with blocking, like figuring out where people are in this room. Like, what are they each doing? What are they each wearing? Like, what are some cues? What's the nonverbal thing, the nonverbal communication that's going on? Maybe in the background as they figure out a way to get out of the room, and there's so much, there's so many like strings because they're all there. That was hard. I think the blocking and a resolution were the most difficult challenges that I can remember, right? Because so much of this like birth process, if you will, is like kind of forgotten because when it's done and you're like, oh, this beautiful baby, I'm so happy to see this beautiful baby. But you're like, wait, this was kind of a shit time at times, wasn't it? But no, I have this beautiful baby.
Yeah, you got a
So
little bit of amnesia.
Yeah, I have to
yeah, which
say,
is why I do it again, I think.
yeah, the blocking thing is so real. Like that
Oh,
is,
yeah.
I think I feel like people don't realize how much time we spend literally just being like, wait, where is the person in the
Yeah.
place and
What do I
where's
do
the
with my
boat?
hands? Yeah.
I know, yeah. It's yeah.
Like who are sitting and who are standing, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And like
Where
when
are
to
they in
tell
relation to each
people
other?
and when
Yeah,
to
sorry.
tell that stuff and when not to, because like that's the other thing is sometimes I'll get bogged down and I'll be like, and then they walked across the room and they did this. And it's like, actually the reader doesn't give a fuck. Like, no, we don't need to say that.
Oh my gosh, this is fascinating. And a natural segue into like, so Annalee, you talked about using post-it notes. What are the other kind of practical tools that y'all are using to work through these problems or to just, draft in general? And now that y'all are talking about blocking, I'm imagining like condiments on a table. What are the kind of practical tools, whether it's, Scrivener or post-it notes that you're using to kind of get through the drafting process? Sherry, what did you use?
I actually don't use anything. I think for my for the eighth Lady Sherlock book, I used two post-it notes just to remind myself underneath all this huge plot that I was doing. I said, please don't forget to rescue this person. That was, I think, and that was not for the librarian, that was for a Lady Sherlock book. And so I very rarely use these kind of tools. I'm always amazed at what other people do. They do like especially people who do things like collages, and I'm just like, how does that work? So I am actually interested in hearing what you guys have that's like practical. I think I used Scrivener once when I was working on a Lady Sherlock book. I realized I have to move things around, a lot of things around, and then it was just too much of a pain in the ass to move them in Word. So I transferred, the book was mostly written, so I transferred them scene by scene into Scrivener so I could move them around. And I really enjoy that process. I thought this is so much less painful. For the next book, I wrote straight up in Scrivener, and then I realized halfway through that I was writing the same thing three times. Like I was giving the same information three times because I only ever see a tiny bit of the story. And I've forgotten what I've written in other spaces. So ever since then, I have not used Scrivener to write.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. Every writer is very, very specific and different. I love to hear it. Annalee, what about you?
I use all kinds of weird stuff. I mean, when I'm working on a novel, I use like different apps for like just tracking my productivity just so that I know like because I'm always on deadline. So it's like if I write X amount per day, will I meet my deadline? So I use a program that kind of sucks called TrackBear. But that just helps you see like how much you've gotten done and how much is left. So that's helpful. I do the post-it note thing. And I find it psychologically very uplifting because I'll write plot points on post-it notes. And as I reach the plot point, I like take it off the wall and crumple it up and throw it to the cats who really love crumply paper, so they're like super excited about that. I make notes, not notes, I'm sorry, I make maps because I'm often describing places that are really freaking weird. That not like in Automatic Noodle, I was just describing my own neighborhood, but after it had been bombed. But like I'm working on a novel now where they're like living in this like weird structure outside the galaxy, and I had to like draw it. And I'm actually I'm not a good artist, so it's just purely for my just so I know where they are in space. Um, and I also keep a world building document running open because if you are doing a lot of world building with like aliens or fantasy worlds or whatever, I find it helpful just to like write down, oh, here's all the names of these planets and people and different weird crap that I'm coming up with. Like, yeah, just so that I like right now the book I'm working on, everybody's a slime mold, so they're all different colors, and I can't remember like which some slime molds are purple and some are red. So anyway, like I have a list of like everybody's slime mold colors. So yeah, so like I do a lot of stuff like that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's kind of like your own quick guide to
Yeah.
building.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Parini, what about you?
I also love Post-its. I have them all
Ah!
over. I make them in different colors to make myself feel
Oh, same.
beautiful. Yeah, I'm like, yay. So I love Post-its. Like they're really great to like I line them up on especially when I'm editing. If there are things that I want to hammer home during the editing process, I'll put like the list of Post-its on below my monitor, and it kind of is like a visual reminder as I'm rereading. Not only are you reading, for continuity, obviously checking typos, but it's also like, what is any opportunity to insert these themes that I wanted to do on the second, third, fourth pass, or whatever, wherever I am. I am a huge advocate of Scrivener. I mean, everybody's process is different. I shouldn't say advocate. I'm a huge user of Scrivener. It has been instrumental in organizing for me because there's like this thing where I can like, here's everything I know about the characters. And that can even make my life easier when it comes to math. Like this character was born here or born here during this time, which means they grew up during this time, which means these are the references they would be familiar with. This is the slang they would use. This is what's going on politically during this time. And so it's been like a great kind of bulletin board that I can flip, I can toggle between like the written page and then the research I did for the novel or the characters that I built. And so it's just been invaluable in having all my information in one spot because while I love the sticky notes are never going to go away. It can be a lot if I'm like writing everything on sticky notes. So I'm very much, and I also read aloud. I read my own work aloud, and it makes me very dehydrated, but it's a way to like catch things that I wouldn't just by reading. Whether it's like alliteration that I maybe didn't intend, maybe things sound weird, maybe I'm repeating words, and I'm like, oh, some variation would be good. Maybe I'm starting the sentence off with too many she's or he's. Um, and just reading out loud, I found has been so great in I don't know in editing.
Totally, totally. And what are the kind of questions you're asking of your work in the editing process to make sure that all of these characters are fully developed, that they all kind of have the depth that you want them to have, and have those arcs kind of moving forward? Are there a set of questions that you're asking, or yeah, what is that editing process like? Parini, if you could let us know.
Oh, well, a big part of that goes back to like, is this satisfying? Because you want to make it a satisfying read. And there are characters who serve a purpose and then they go away, and that's okay because nobody cares. And then there are characters who you're like, wait a minute, I did a disservice, or no, you actually, there's a curiosity there. So it's either, okay, we need more or we need less. And I think that's what on, the editing phase, that's what I'm focused on. And it's like, wait, um, should there be more? Should there be less of that particular person? Is this satisfying? And I don't mean that I'm like, necessarily a happy ending. I just mean like, was that arc sufficient for that character? And the introduction I gave them was their sign off okay. And I think that's That's generally what I do. And also the blocking. The blocking is a huge thing for me in editing because I'm not really necessarily concerned about that when I'm generating. I'm very I my first drafts are very dialogue heavy. The dialogue is what propels me to figure out plot even. I don't outline. I just let the characters talk because they're always like yammering in my head. And when I'm really, it's a good day or I'm seized by whatever, it's very dialogue heavy. And then I go back and I'm like, well, let's consider some emotions. Let's consider some physical space. Let's consider some smells. What are they smelling? What are they hearing? What are they looking at? And so I feel like I have to acknowledge the senses and the world in editing. And yeah, that's always like, um, yeah, something that I return to and I'm like, oh, wow, this is bad. But that's why we edit. Yeah.
Exactly. So much
Yeah.
happens in that editing process. I think satisfying is a good litmus test, or a good question to ask yourself. Annalee, what about you? What are the questions you're kind of asking of your manuscript in the editing phase?
I mean, definitely the biggest question is, does every character get their time to, have a moment, basically? I mean, I watch a lot of like episodic television, whether it's like Star Trek or, The Residence or whatever. I guess The Residence wasn't episodic, it was more serialized. But anyway, the point is, you like oftentimes an episode is kind of structured around one character, right? Like, and that's kind of like we have this moment where we like dive into their past and stuff. So I like to make sure every character gets their episode where we get a little backstory and we like kind of come to empathize with them more or hate them more depending on where we're going with that character. And yeah, I think maybe this isn't so much an ensemble cast thing, but I think the other thing I really work on when I'm revising is that I tend to start in a very describe-y way. And so oftentimes when I'm going back through, I notice that I've like backfilled a bunch of stuff. Like, so what I mean is like, I'll say, oh, this character had been doing blah, 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 and had been doing this and that, and had been doing all this stuff. And it's like, wait, why don't I just have them do it? Like, why don't I, instead of saying that they had been doing it, like actually show the scene of them doing the thing? So I do a lot of that, a lot of like, how about let's, be a little more active. So yeah.
That's good yet that y'all have this real knowledge though of what comes out in the drafting and what needs to be added and questioned and looked at in the editing phase. And I'm sure that comes with time. But Sherry, what about you? What are the questions you're kind of asking of your manuscript in the editing phase?
I am an iterative writer, so I hardly ever write a book from beginning to end. Usually I'll stop at like, 20,000, 40,000, various points when I can't seem to move forward anymore. And that's when I go, okay, something about what I have written is not quite right. So then I go and fix that to see if I could push further. And then at some point I will again say, well, I don't seem to know what to do anymore. And at that point, maybe a different problem. It may be because I've lost the emotional thread of where the people are, and then I have to again go back and fix that before I can push forward again. So by the time I get to near the end of the book is in like, it's not necessarily readable, but it's structurally correct, and it has and all the characters would have like, it would have been obvious to at that point it would be obvious to the readers and to me finally what their essential fear, what their essential pain, and what their essential fear is. And I should have have dealt with that essential pain, essential fear in the process of the book. And then usually if I have a book that's 70 or 80,000 and need more revising, then it just like to write it better, tightening up the individual scenes and so on, all of the prose.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. What their essential fear is. It feels like you really know those characters if you know that.
Right. If you know their essential pain, you will know their essential fear, because their essential fear is always caused by their essential pain.
You mentioned structure And I wanted to talk a little bit about how the characters and the structure and form kind of your books intersect. What are some of the like structural or formal choices you made in order to give voice to so many characters? Sherry, if you don't mind starting.
This question sounds a bit too high class for me. What specifically are you looking for?
Well, I think like something that makes me think of this is Annalee talking about maybe there being episodic chapters, or there being chapter headers for each specific character. Was there something kind of structurally you were thinking of in order to spotlight each different character? And we'll start with Annalee for this one. And we'll let you think about it, Sherry.
Yes, here's my very high-toned answer to this question. So my characters are robots, so they're doing a lot of they have, for lack of a better way of putting it, they have Wi-Fi in their brain, so they can do a lot of like psychic texting. I mean, it seems psychic, but it's just using microwaves. So they are texting each other a lot. So a lot of the book we actually had to talk about this in terms of how to do the typesetting, because they have a lot of group chats. And so the way that I kind of make room for them, and also this helps with like identifying who's who, is like I have these group chats. And so they'll have these moments where they go into their group chat and they have conversations. And so I think that was one of the ways that I allowed them all to be as a group. But of course, I also had to have the Post-it notes to track everybody's traumas and how they were dealing with their traumas.
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting, the group chat thing. And Parini, what about you? Were there any kind of structural elements you brought into the book because it was an ensemble?
Right. So I'm because it started off as a short story, when I reread it, I knew that the 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 redemptive love story, the platonic love story, was going to be how Geeta and her ex-best friend kind of found each other again. And I knew it was going to be set against the backdrop of all these women demanding that they off their husbands. And that was really kind of the structural. I was like, once I figured that out, that was the scaffolding that everything else would work around. And so once I had that, it kind of felt like this like key. And I was like, all right, I think I can do this. I think I know what I'm going to say here about. And it's been beautifully said here about like the ensemble, and really is like this peephole into the lives of other people, but also the sense of community and friendship, and how we don't have to be alone, and how we can accomplish so much more. And I'm not advocating murder. Like, I feel like I have to say that every time I do want to do an event. It's like, that's not what I necessarily mean by we can accomplish more together. But anything, like replace homicide with any other, valiant goal. And it's just, I think once I realized that Geeta didn't have to be alone, it was like, oh, well, then she can have all these friends. And that kind of, I don't know, became a solution of like, oh, this could be interesting. This could be interesting to follow this character as she gains community instead of just being ostracized in this village in modern India.
Murder friends.
Murder friends. Homicide homies.
I think mystery is actually very friendly to the exact sort of thing you want in terms of people who are forced to know each other very fast, because mystery mandates that everybody involved must be hiding a secret, otherwise the mystery is no fun. And so then turn by turn, everybody, whatever they are hiding, gets peeled back and thrust out in the open, and then it's like, well, what to do? Suddenly I am among these people who like know my deepest, darkest secrets. So that is the fun part. And I think the structure of the mystery itself demands that different plot lines come together and are braided together toward that final solution. So that kind of, suddenly everybody who's been leading these disparate lives found out that they've all been somehow involved like almost linked cosmically by these events and happenstances and coincidences, and suddenly their lives are intertwined.
Absolutely. Oh, beautifully said by all of you. I just have one more question I wanted to ask, and then we'll see what the Q&A has in store for us. But I wanted to ask, what advice would you all give writers who are finding themselves juggling a large cast of characters and maybe struggling a little bit through the process? Maybe having that moment you were having, Sherry, where they're wondering why. And if they're up for the task, what advice would you give those writers? And we'll start with you, Parini. Oh, and you're on mute. Sorry.
I'm actually happy I'm on mute because what I first said was like the strangled sound of okay. I've taught creative writing and fiction workshops, and so I wouldn't actually say this as an assignment, but it might be helpful, like to write a diary entry as one of your characters. Like even if the work isn't in first person, to get into any character's head where you might be struggling with their fears, with their pain, all of that, to like figure that out. Because I think once you have that key to that character, and if you do it, do it for whichever characters you're struggling to kind of have reveal themselves to you, writing anything in first person, whether it's a diary entry, whatever exercise you think would work for you, like writing an entry in Scrivener, just to spend some time with them. Because even if you don't end up using everything that you discover about them, it can be so helpful to just kind of unlock, like, oh, this is what drives this person. This is maybe a skeleton that's in their closet. This is something that happened when they were a kid. This is someone who hurt them. This is a disappointment they had. It can just be really illuminating. And like I said, even if you don't use everything verbatim, you will carry it with you when you take them to the page and when you have them interact with your other characters.
Oh, that is such a really practical, great
Oh, I hope so.
assignment.
I feel like it was too prescriptive. That's why, like, it's easier when you're a teacher being like, you will write this and you will enjoy it.
It sounds like a super helpful exercise if you're stuck. Thank you. Annalee, what about you? What advice would you give those writers?
Definitely, I agree with all that stuff too. I think that for me, I think it really helps to imagine to kind of understand the characters' obsessions as well as, of course, their traumas and stuff like that. But like, what are the things that they keep coming back to that they're really focused on? That's really helpful. The other thing is like thinking about the connections between the characters too. Like, what are like, because when you have an ensemble cast, like you might have like Parini has twins. I have two characters who are already friends and who are like become partner, they like hook up. Some people don't think they're hooking up. I don't know why. But anyway, they are hooking up officially. And like, so they have these connections. And this might be too silly. I'm afraid that this is something I do though. I play a lot of D&D. And so sometimes when I'm working with an ensemble cast, I try to figure out like, who's the cleric, who's the fighter, who's like the wizard, like who's the bard. And like, again, very silly. Obviously, I'm not writing those my characters don't really map perfectly to that, but it helps you think again about like keeping the party balanced. Like you kind of need a bard, you kind of need a fighter, or you need people to balance each other out. So I do try to think about that. Like, how do you have a well-rounded group? Unless you want it to not be a well-rounded group, in which case it's like, oh, they're all fighters. That's really fucked up. And they have like all this stuff going on because of that.
Oh, that sounds also super helpful. Thank you. And Sherry, what about you? What advice would you give writers who are struggling through the process?
I can't give specific advice on how to improve characters better than these ladies have. But I can offer a little bit of what I did on the Librarians when I was having trouble with these characters. Which is a little odd because I don't usually find myself doing that. But I think in the first few drafts, I wrote in a rather casual voice. And then when the draft where things started coming together, I wrote very differently. I basically kicked up my diction a couple of notches because I realized that these are slightly older characters. They are not young kids. They are people who have being through the grinder a couple of times. They carry disappointment. They carry, they just like, they're not happy-go-lucky kids anymore. And so they have thought about life, and they have, thought about what they did wrong, and they have thought about how did they end up being where they were. And so I kind of kicked up just basically, like I said, a higher level diction, like a slightly more philosophical voice. And in a way, that's what made some of the difference. It's like, I don't think I've ever entered character this way before, but it was very helpful for me in this particular instance. And also, I think in general, if people are, how to put it this way, are the characters, in Lord of the Rings really so remarkable as characters? If you pull them apart as individuals and compare them to how characters are written today, the psychological depth writers can get to today, are those characters that well written? What made it work? What made the story work? The plot and the world building. There are other things in a story besides characters. So don't just worry about your characters. Make sure your plot is bang on. And that can carry a lot of character like momentum forward.
That's really, really
like
well.
your characters are there to serve the story. They're not independent of the story. Make sure the story is damn good.
Gauntlet Throne, J.R.R. Tolkien. Well, thank you all so much for humoring my questions. We've got lots going on here in our Q&A. So James has a couple questions. The first being, how do writers maintain clarity of point of view with multiple characters? I think we talked about that quite a bit, but this is interesting. How do you know you're edging toward too many? Annalee, did you ever think maybe there's too many people involved, too many robots on?
I mean, there's other robots too. Like there's another character I didn't even talk about. I that's a really good question. I sometimes have had to combine characters in like two characters into one character. And I think that I think there is a moment when you start to realize there's too many, when like you realize that like you have multiple characters kind of doing the same thing, like performing the same role in the story.
Yeah, that's a super helpful litmus test. And Parini, I feel like you'll have good insight on this question, because you developed kind of someone who was in the background into the foreground. How do you handle a character whom you want to come forward, taking on a more principal character role, and balance the growth and evolution of this character while letting the original main character recede into the background?
How do you manage it? Well, I think at that point, plot might serve you, because you can have that character, again, this is going to sound so prescriptive, but you can have that character do something surprising, which puts them and their motivation in the foreground. And that surprising act can affect your main character, but it allows for a natural, like, sliding scale, at least temporarily. And I guess that would, because then you're not, if that action affects your main character in the story, then at least you're not, you're still staying with the A plot. It's just that the B and the C are now serving the A in a different, hopefully illuminating way.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's super helpful.
I hope so. I don't know. I mean, there are definitely a myriad of other ways. It's just that that's the first thing that came to my mind.
And Sherry, I want to ask you this question because I think I read somewhere that you said that the Librarians is maybe one of the longer books of war. I think I'm saying that word wrong. But so James is asking, how do you develop fully an ensemble cast of characters without running the total pages to an unrealistic number of 700 pages? Did you write more than what the current number is now, and how did you kind of wrangle it in?
I kind of reached like 126,000 words when the book was only like 85% done. And I thought I'd written books that long before, but no, I went back and checked this. actually, I didn't. This was like 20% longer than like my longest other stuff. So I actually told my editor, say, look, prepare, order more paper or whatever. And they replied very kindly, we would like you to keep this as a whole under 120. And so this is a new problem for me, because typically I write short, and I find that I have to, add things that were missing at the end. So this time I actually had to just cut stuff. And frankly, I'm always in favor of cutting. Like, there's like hardly any manuscript in existence, like no matter how much you enjoy it, that doesn't benefit from some cutting. After I must have cut at least 15,000 words out of the manuscript, and because I had to add some more stuff at the end to like complete the story. And when I read it today, I don't see what's cut, so it's all good. So
Yeah,
just be ruthless. If you write 700 pages, fine, then cut out the unnecessary bits.
it's true. And Annalee, I'd love to hear your perspective on this too, since you were writing a novella. How did you keep it novella length?
Oh man, I write short. In fact, my novella was originally like 22,000 words. And I bumped it up to 35. Yeah, it's always a struggle for me. So I'm on the opposite end, where I do have to cut stuff out for sure. But then I'm like, I have to also write things in. When I cut things out, it means I have to write more things, which is makes it harder. But yeah, so I don't, for whatever reason, I'm just not, I always write shorter than I probably should. So yeah, so my task is always to try to add things.
This question is for Parini. Any tips on introducing your characters in a large cast? How do we meet all the different characters?
I generally like to trickle it in because it can be overwhelming. And if I do it gradually, then the reader kind of stays with me and they're like, yes, this is the character who's this is the character, instead of just being kind of overwhelmed. And if they're overwhelmed, they might lose interest, and that's obviously not what you want. And so there's no one way to do any of this, but I've noticed that at least in the beginning of the Bandit Queens, I think I'll have, whether it's a comedic line or a punchline or something, and someone says it, and then I'll give a little bit about that character, because if they made you laugh, there's a chance that you might be interested in them. And the same goes for another emotion. If they make you angry, maybe they say something rude, that's fine too. Maybe if they say anything, that the dialogue can be a nice way to then segue into something about the character that then kind of like makes the reader interested, because they've now said this thing to maybe your protagonist or to whomever.
Oh, that's very smart. Introduce them in their own words.
Yeah. Oh, that was smart. I like that.
And I'm now curious to hear, Sherry, how do you introduce your characters in your book?
I think character introduction, as well as how you open a book in general, there's no one way to do it. So I think you should do it the way you prefer to do it. Like, what kind of book do you like to read? How do they introduce characters? The example I always give is, again, The Lord of the Rings. I was on my third reread of the book before I realized that it starts with a 15-page single-spaced prologue that has absolutely nothing to do plot-wise with the rest of the book. And I was like, really? I don't even remember this. So I proceeded to read it again, because I must have read it before. And then I was like asking myself, how many people open this book, plowed into this prologue that's all about the history of the Shire, and why did the Hobbits start smoking crack or whatever it was they smoke, the weed, pipe weed.
I think it's pot, not crack.
Right. So I was thinking to myself, so how many people open the book to this prologue, was fed a mouthful of like made up history and then said, that's it. But then again, how many people was fed this mouthful of history and said, whoa, feed me more, So Tolkien opened his book how he liked to open it. He wanted more history. He loved history. That's what he lived for. So just open your book and introduce your characters how you like your characters to be introduced, how you like your book to read.
Sherry, I really want you to do, you know what people do, rewatch podcasts of shows, older shows. I would love you to do a reread podcast of you reading The Lord of the Rings. I think that would
Yeah,
be
I love
like,
that. Like, just like, what the hell? There's all this history. Like, what's going on here, people?
I would absolutely listen to that. But Annalee, what about you? About how did you introduce your characters?
I like to introduce characters in the middle of like an emergency or a stressful situation or like an intense situation where people a little bit like what Sherry was talking about when like there's a murder and suddenly everyone has to kind of like become intimate really quickly. So I was looking back and I realized that like pretty much all of my novels start with some kind of stressful situation where people encounter each other. And with Automatic Noodle, they all wake up after having been shut down for much, much longer than they typically they would be shut down for the night and wake up in the morning and they realize it's been like 6 months. And they're all and the restaurant is flooding. And like at first we're just in the point of view of Stay Behind, who's been a soldier, and he's kind of like booting up and he's like, are we under attack? Are we being shot? What's happening? Oh my God. And you're the reader and you're like, oh my God, oh my God. And then it's like, he looks down and he's like holding a mop and a bucket and is like, oh, I have to mop the restaurant. Okay. And then he looks around and we see all of the other robots who've been shut down. And so each one boots up, boots up each one and they kind of have something to add to the emergency. Mostly they're just like, what the hell? Oh my God. And so I just love that, like people coming together in an emergency and kind of pitching in or not pitching in, in which is also a character trait. So
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, I think this is a great note as any to end on. I'm so, so grateful to you all for sharing your time, your expertise, for talking with us about this really fun topic and the fun and inventive ways that y'all wrote wonderful ensemble casts. I want to thank everyone who joined us here on Zoom and on YouTube. I think if you learned anything from these folks, you should buy their books and see how they pulled these incredible stories off with so many well-developed, funny characters in them, and have a great time reading them because these books are all a good time. And yeah, thank you all so much for spending your evening with us.
yeah, thank you for having
Thank you.
us.
Thank you.
Happy writing, everyone.
Yeah, happy writing.